Good afternoon. It's nice to see you all today. This is that time of the summer that I really love. It's almost as though we're entering kind of deep summer, and the patterns and rhythms of life tend to slow down briefly. So I hope you're enjoying it as I am. Several years ago, my wife Molly and I popped into a little used bookstore in Lakeside, near where we were living at the time in Bryant Park. And tucked away on a shelf, a tiny shelf in the back corner of this used bookstore, was this tiny, worn-out little book that probably wouldn't have caught anyone else's attention unless they were a church nerd like me. And when I opened it, I realized pretty quickly that I was holding an original copy of the first American Book of Common Prayer, which is what this is. Printed in New York in the late 18th century, probably around 1790, only a few years after the Episcopal Church reorganized or reconstituted itself following the Revolutionary War, when all the clergy who were loyal to the crown left and went back to England. The first General Convention of the Episcopal Church was in Philadelphia in 1785. So this came into existence not long after that. And on the inside of the back cover, written so faintly that you can almost not make them out, there are two names, Isabella Williams, and then the other one appears to be Sylvia Greenwood. Some of you may have learned from my sermons that in addition to being a church nerd, I can spend hours going down rabbit holes as a history nerd as well. I love the pursuit of history. I love researching, and I love looking for answers about people whose lives are fascinating to me, which is exactly what happened when I found the two names inscribed in the back of this book. And for the last couple weeks, as I look back at the book, I've searched down genealogies, parish records, diocesan records, anything I could find. My wife is tired of hearing about the prayer book. And while there are a few intriguing possibilities that I've uncovered, the truth is that I still really don't have any idea who these two women were. And as I started to prepare to tell the story to you all today, I think the anonymity of these two women is exactly the point, and the lesson that we can learn from this little tiny, well-loved prayer book from 1794. Because for us, these two names are almost the only thing that we have left behind of two faithful lives, these two women. Somewhere along the way, Isabella wrote her name in the back of this prayer book, and then Sylvia did the same maybe a generation later, and that's all we know. The book passed from one pair of hands to another, not merely as a possession or a keepsake, but likely as a companion in a daily life and a daily pattern of prayer that was sustaining for them. I imagine these women opening the pages every morning and reading morning prayer, stopping in the middle of the day and doing noonday prayer, and then closing the day with evening prayer, and maybe even compline. They probably would have brought it with them to church on Sunday. And it was probably an anchor for them during one of the most uncertain moments in the history of the Episcopal Church in America. The existence of our church to us seems like a given, but for a while there, after the Revolution, there was no guarantee. The war was over. The Church of England had disappeared from American life. Clergy were scattered, and American bishops had only recently begun to be consecrated with Samuel Seabury in 1784. So there was no obvious reason for these women to believe that the Episcopal Church might survive into the form that we know it here today. And yet, here we are. Not because of a brilliant strategic plan that anyone hatched at the first convention in 1785, but because ordinary Christians, faithful people like Isabella and Sylvia, kept praying. They baptized their children, they buried their dead, they gathered for communion whenever a priest would come around, which was not that often at the time. They opened little prayer books like this one, morning after morning and evening after evening, Sunday after Sunday, until, almost without anyone really noticing, the church in America was settled and established again. Thanks be to God. And Isabella and Sylvia were among the ordinary Christians who helped make that happen. This is where we confront the gospel today. Jesus is looking around at those gathered near him, and he says, "Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." He's not dismissing his own family. He is teaching us that the church itself is a family, woven together not by blood, but by the steady and quiet faithfulness of its members. Isabella and Sylvia may almost be forgotten by history, but they belonged, and they still belong to that family. And because they did, they helped hand the faith on to people that they would never, ever meet, including us. And this is why I love the Feast of Macrina of Caesarea. Many people remember her famous brothers, church fathers, Basil the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, bishops, theologians, luminaries of the early church. But Gregory, Macrina's brother, wrote an entire account of his sister Macrina's life because he understood something remarkable. If we remembered Basil, we remembered Gregory, but we forgot Macrina, we would misunderstand where holiness and true faithfulness comes from. Macrina never became a bishop. She never presided at a council. She never wrote the books that made herself or her brothers famous. But when Basil, her brother, came home from Athens after his big education, full of learning, perhaps a little full of himself, it was Macrina, his older sister, who redirected his gifts and his ego away from his own glory and toward Christ. It was Macrina. When Gregory was crushed by the grief after Basil's death, it was Macrina who was his pastoral caregiver and teacher. History remembers the bishops, but the bishops remembered Macrina. And perhaps that's how the church has always grown and continues to grow. Not because of famous saints only, but because of the lives of ordinary Christians whose faith quietly shapes the people around them. Until years later, someone looks back and realizes that before there was a great bishop or a great theologian, there was simply someone who cared enough to teach them how to pray, how to trust Jesus, and how to be truly faithful. This is why our prayer book, the one we have today, begins the catechism in the back, listing the ministers of the church. Who are the ministers of the church? Y'all know the answer to that one? What's the first order of ministry listed? Lay people, then bishops, then priests, then deacons. Because the ordering isn't about hierarchy as much as it is a confession that the life of the church that we are a part of has always rested upon faithful women and men who do the will of God. By handing on what they themselves have received, people like Macrina, people like Isabella Williams, people like Sylvia Greenwood, and by the grace of God, people like you all. Amen.